Testing, 1, 2, 3. Better late than never. Welcome to Dis and Dat 1114. We're doing chapter 1, labor, in Cellis Bueno's book on attention. More specifically, labor, time, and power in cognitive capitalism. Claudio Cellis Bueno. The traditional definition of the attention economy, Herbert Simon, presents attention as one commodity among others. One commodity among others, something to be exchanged in the market and hence regulated by laws of supply and demand. As mentioned in the introduction, the concept of the attention economy was forged as a theoretical response to the growing informization of the processes involved in the production of commodities. Hence, in post-industrial capitalism, human attention appears as a scarce commodity whose value is determined by an abundance of information. Methodologically, this definition of the attention economy mimics that of political economy, focusing on the sphere of distribution, i.e., the market, in an attempt to unveil the laws of supply and demand that determine the value of a given commodity. In our case, for example, human attention. As will be shown shortly, the problems with this perspective is that it conceals the relation between value and labor that lies at the heart of the attention economy. This means that by defining attention as a scarce commodity, political economy cannot examine how attention becomes a value-producing activity in the first place. Following Marx's critique of political economy, this chapter argues that for an adequate understanding of the attention economy, a methodological reinterpretation must take place to unveil the relation between value and labor in the attention economy. Is necessary to substitute the conceptualization of attention as labor for that of attention as a commodity, which at the same time requires shifting the critique from the spheres of distribution and consumption to that of production. Let me break here for a second and say, well, yes and no. This is is this a good or a bad thing? And we'll find out. But it's important to note this at the front end. The attention economy from the standpoint of labor. One of the main differences between Marx's treatment of labor and that of political economy is Marx's conceptual distinction between labor power and labor process. Footnote 1. In Capital, the book, Marx defines labor power as labor capacity, that is, the aggregate of those mental and physical capacities, those mental and physical capabilities existing in the physical form, the living personality of a human being, capabilities which he sets in motion whenever he produces a use value of any kind. In this sense, labor power refers to the capacity or potentiality of a human being to perform an activity capable of producing use values. Labor process, on the other hand, is the materialization of labor power. In the labor process, what was pure potentiality is actualized as value-producing activity. For Marx, labor is, quote, a process between man and nature, a process by which man, through his own actions, mediates, regulates, and controls the metabolism between himself and nature. He confronts the materials of nature as a force of nature. He sets in motion the natural forces which belong to his own body, his arms, legs, head, and hands, in order to appropriate the materials of nature in a form adapted to his own needs, close quote. As will be shown below, this particular definition of the labor process can be quite problematic as well, since it may be interpreted as repeating the ahistorical understanding of labor that is characteristic of political economy. Nevertheless, the distinction between labor power and labor process plays a crucial role when approaching the question of labor in the attention economy. This is so mainly because it facilitates uncovering the notion of surplus value that remains hidden for surplus value. For Marx, political enemy. As will be shown below, this particular definition of the labor process can be quite problematic as well, since it may be interpreted as repeating the ahistorical understanding of labor that is characteristic of political economy. Nevertheless, the distinction between labor power and labor process plays a crucial role when approaching the question of labor in the attention economy. This is so mainly because it facilitates uncovering the notion of surplus value that remains hidden for political economy, while the latter conceives the value of attention as the natural effect of the law of supply and demand. A critical approach to the attention economy must examine the way in which attention as labor process, that is, as valorization activity, generates a surplus value that is monetized and then turns into profit. According to Marx, The lack of a conceptual distinction between labor power and labor process inevitably creates the confusion between the value of labor as a commodity bought by the capitalist in the job market and the value created by labor and objectified in the commodity. Footnote 2. Consequently, political economy treats both as one and the same thing, concealing the fact that there is a difference, that is, a surplus, between the value of the labor power bought by the capitalist and the value of the commodity produced by the labor process. For Marx, political economy places labor alongside other commodities and hence explains its value through laws and tendencies belonging to the sphere of distribution. In doing so, political economy defines the relation between labor and value to be the result of a natural law of supply and demand. Contrary to this, Marx argues that only a critique of capitalism, which focuses on the sphere of production, will be able to denaturalize the situation, the relation between labor and value, and to identify the exploitative nature of capitalist production. In other words, it is necessary, that is, the aggregate of those mental and physical capabilities existing in the physical form, the living personality of a human being, capabilities which he sets in motion, whenever he produces a use value of any kind. In this sense, labor power refers to the capacity or potentiality of a human being to perform an activity capable of producing use values. Labor process, on the other hand, is the materialization of labor power, period. In the labor process, what was pure potentiality is actualized as value-producing activity. For Marx, labor is, quote, a process between man and nature, a process by which man, through his own actions, mediates, regulates, and controls the metabolism between himself and nature, confronts the materials of nature as a force of nature. He sets in motion the natural forces which belong to his own body, his arms, legs, head, and hands, in order to appropriate the materials of nature in a form adapted to his own needs, close quote. According to Marx, the lack of a conceptual distinction between labor power and labor process invariably creates the confusion between the value of labor as a commodity bought by the capitalist in the job market and the value created by labor and objectified in the commodity. Consequently, political economy treats both as one and the same thing, concealing the fact that there is a difference, a surplus, between the value of the labor power bought by the capitalist and the value of the commodity produced by the labor process. For Marx, political economy places labor alongside other commodities and hence explains its value through laws and tendencies belonging to the sphere of distribution. In doing so, political economy defines the relation between labor and value to be the result of a natural law of supply and demand. Contrary to this, Marx argues that only a critique of capitalism, which focuses on the sphere of production, will be able to denaturalize the relation between labor and value and to identify the exploitative nature of capitalist production. In other words, it is necessary to shift the analysis of labor from the sphere of distribution, where the value of labor power is thought of as being the natural result of supply and demand, to the sphere of production, where labor appears as a valorization process. This shift makes it possible to conceptualize the category of surplus value and hence to identify the key characteristics of capitalist exploitation. In Chapter 6 of Capital, the book, Marx argues that classical political economy is based on the ideological, liberal presupposition that all economic exchange takes place between two proprietors of commodities who enter freely into an exchange relationship in the pursuit of their self-interest. When these conditions are ensured, we have a free market that operates smoothly and regulates itself by the law of supply and demand, a view exemplified by Adam Smith's action of the quote-unquote invisible hand and by Friedrich Hayek's quote-unquote price system. In a well-known passage from this chapter, Marx refers sarcastically to the market as the very Eden of the innate rights of man. Only in the market as I'll start that again. Freedom, because both buyer and seller of a commodity, say of labor power, I'll start that again. Freedom, because both buyer and seller of a commodity, say of labor power, are constrained only by their own free will. They contract as free agents, and the agreement they come by is but the form in which they give legal expression to their common will. Equality, because each enters into relation with the other as with a simple owner of commodities, and the exchange equivalent for equivalent property, because each disposes only of what is his own, and Bentham, because each looks only to himself. The only force that brings them together and puts them in relation with each other is the selfishness, the gain, and the private interests of each, close quote. In the first line, Marx uses labor power as example of a commodity that is sold and bought in the market. This is no mere example, however. Marx is precisely trying to show the methodological inconsistency of political economy, which equates labor power with all other commodities, thus concealing the distinction between labor power and labor process. Furthermore, Marx points out that by focusing on the sphere of distribution, the asymmetric power relation that defines the sphere of production and which serves as the basis for the exploitation of surplus value becomes veiled by the notions of freedom, equality, property, and self-interest. Freedom, equality, property, and self-interest that characterize the ideal relation among subjects in the market. In the specific case of the attention economy, political economy seems to reproduce the same ideological principles that Marx denounces. A good example of this can be found in Seth Goldstein's attempt to form an attention trust, as it were, that would fight for the attention rights of Internet users. In a 2005 declaration, Goldstein defines four basic rights necessary for establishing an open and transparent market for the attention economy. Number one, property. I own my attention, and I can secure it. I can store it securely in private. Number two, mobility. I can move my attention wherever I want, whenever I want to. Number three, economy. I can pay attention to whomever I wish and be paid for it. Number four, transparency. I see how my attention is being used, close quote. Now, these four basic rights of property, mobility, economy, and transparency, these four basic rights, he claims, make it possible for individuals to participate in a free, open market for exchanging their attention. When seen from the perspective of the market, these rights played the same role as those identified by Marx's critique of political economy. Property, freedom, equality, and self-interest appear as the basic requirements for a transparent and effective economy of attention. That means, in Goldstein's view, it is presupposed that attention, like labor, belongs to a juridical subject, that is, a proprietor who has the right to bring it to the market. Footnote 3. The problem with this view is that it impedes grasping the category of surplus value that guides capitalist production, limiting the understanding of how the attention economy turns human attention into economic profit. This is so because the production and extortion of surplus value occur outside the limits of the market or of the spheres of circulation. In his critique of political economy, Marx concludes that in order to develop an adequate understanding of the relationship between value and labor under capitalist conditions of production, it is necessary to move from the sphere of distribution to the sphere of production. This shift allows Marx to introduce the conceptual distinction between labor power and labor process. With it, Marx shows that although the capitalist is buying labor power at the price set by the laws of supply and demand dictated by the labor market at the level of production, the capitalist is in fact not paying the worker for the total value generated by his or her labor process. The capitalist is basically extorting part of the value produced by the worker during the working day. And he or she can do so only because of the asymmetric power relation that situates him or her as the owner and possessor of the means of production, as opposed to the worker who owns nothing but his or her labor power. This, Marx shows, is the source of surplus value, which can be conceptualized only when the analysis has moved from the sphere of distribution, where labor power is sold and purchased, to the sphere of production, where the labor power generates value. A critique of the attention economy must shift, therefore, from an understanding of attention as a scarce commodity to one where attention appears as a form of labor. Attention appears as a form of labor through which surplus value is generated and extorted. From the perspective of political economy, attention is not seen as a valorization process, but as a commodity governed by a law of supply and demand, a law intrinsic to the sphere of distribution, not production. In other words, political economy reproduces an unproblematic understanding of the attention economy, which conceals the asymmetric relation between labor and capital that grounds the extortion of surplus value. Rather, it is necessary to understand attention as a new form of labor and to unveil the concrete mechanisms of production and extraction of surplus value that make of the attention economy a strictly capitalist phenomenon. let me stop there because we're nowhere near even the middle of chapter 1 on labor. In in the text. Then so watching as working will start again likely on Monday. Let me thank you for your attention. I will therefore return us to the meeting and stop the live